whoever fully implements this thing is going to have such a competitive advantage, and there will be winners and losers. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch. You could see some medium-sized companies that grow really rapidly because of deploying AI. It's easier to implement it in downstream because you're dealing with processes. I think the upstream work, where one area you're more working in, is also very interesting to me, both in the geoscience area. And I've just thought about, man, just plowing through the data and really making an interpreter way more efficient. And how much of it can be AI, how much of it you still need that human intervention. And I think that the creativity of a geologist that kind of looks at the whole area, and you still have pretty sparse data sometimes. And so figuring that out and then integrating it in. But then as you get more and more data, you get into production. To me, it's going to be really interesting.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I have a Geoscience Decoded podcast today with Bob Peebler. Thank you very much, Bob, for joining us. And
Thank you.
so let's jump right into it, Bob. Tell us a little bit about your background and the history in the geoscience industry.
Yeah, sure. I started graduated from electrical engineering back in 1970. And I went right into the energy space working for Schlumberger. I spent 18 years there, many jobs, all the way from field engineer to technical staff and on and on. I ended up running North America. I had about 6,000 employees, and I was, I think, all of 30 years old. And actually, that's not true. At the end of that journey, I was all of 40 years old. And I decided at that time, I said, I'm 40. Am I going to be a lifer, or am I going to go do something else? And I've kind of had the entrepreneurial bug, and so I left. And of course, I didn't have a particularly happy wife when I came home and mentioned to her I just quit my job and I didn't have another one lined up. But I was sure I was going to figure out something. From there, I did get into the geoscience more directly at Landmark Graphics. Many of you probably remember Landmark, that we were very much into writing the 3D wave. We were the first interactive visual interpreter system of 3D. We hit it perfectly. We hit the 3D wave, and the company grew year after year for almost 10 years. After that, we decided that we had gone public and decided that it was a tough ride to be a small cap publicly traded company in a cyclic industry. And so we basically sold ourselves to Halliburton. And I spent a couple years there. I don't know if you remember back in the e-biz days, 2000, 2001. And so they needed somebody to look out for their e-biz strategy. And so I participated in that for a while, but I knew I didn't want to be in a big company again. And so I left. And then I ended up a couple years later, I ended up at the Ion Geophysical. At that time, it was called Input Output, basically selling equipment. And I completely changed the strategy of the company. I wanted to be more oil company facing versus contractor facing. The thing I discovered is that our main customer is contractors, and they hardly ever had money. And so we did some acquisitions. We bought a software company. We bought a company called GXT that was in the processing. And they were also in data acquisition in the sense of running what they call spans, 2D surveys in the Gulf of Mexico, all around the world. Turned out to be a great business. We grew that business up to about a 1.4 billion cap. And then I retired. And then from that, I've done quite a few interesting consumer products. My wife and I got into activewear and built that up, sold to Fila. And then after that, I got into bottled water.
Great. Yes.
And I recently sold that. And interesting enough, I wasn't sure. I had kind of left the oil and gas technology business. Maybe I felt like the 90s was where all the action was in some ways. And I was kind of tired of it. That's why I kind of got into consumer products. Then AI came about. And even though I'm getting to be a little bit ancient, I had some people reach out to me and say, hey, the industry, people were trying to introduce our product or our offering into the Texas market. They already had quite a bit of business downstream and refineries, chemical plants, LNG, but mainly in Europe and Middle East. A company called Illusions, and so they contacted me, and I said, "Why wouldn't I want to do that? You know, I get to learn about AI, and I get to get reconnected to a lot of my friends in the industry. So that's a long story, but it's been a long history.
And but that's fantastic, though. It's very interesting to see the progression you've taken, and also how when you started it, right, that was the first move to digital computing for the industry. I remember it was quite a big deal, right, in the early '90s, where we were deploying workstations for the very first time for some of those scientists and running a landmark software on it.
It's you know, if I remind people, and a lot of people are young enough they don't remember the '70s or the '90s that much, but
But sure,
you know, I tell people, number one, in 1990 we didn't have internet. There was
that's right.
internet out there, but it was a government thing, and it wasn't accessible. You really didn't have any way to deal with the internet. A gigabyte of data at that time was about
Very large.
$29,000 a gigabyte. You didn't have Wi-Fi. You didn't have cloud computing. We were just really moving from mainframes to workstations, and right there, a bunch of companies have been birthed: DEC Computing, Sun Microsystems, IBM RT. So you had all that coming out, and then if you go to the end of that decade, we had, you know, half the people in the country were on the internet. Of course, Netscape is what really enabled that. And what happened to Netscape, right? And then you had Wi-Fi that came in over, I think, '96. You had cloud
Mhm.
computing that came at the end of that decade. You had, I think, Salesforce.com was the first guys in
Mhm.
to create that. So that, to me, was the foundation decade to build the IT infrastructure that we all so much enjoy today. We don't even think about. Can you imagine a gigabyte? We probably pay a penny for a gigabyte of data now.
That's
We
right.
think Wi-Fi is like
Ubiquitous.
water. You have to have
Yeah,
it. Uh,
yeah.
so it's quite a change. But what we're seeing now, I would say that AI is about where we were at in 1990. At that time, it we're just at the beginning, and you know, every everybody. I just walked across the street and went to a convention on downstream, and everybody's talking about AI, right? And a lot of it is fluff, a lot of it is noise, and but there's some things really being developed that's cool. So
Yes.
great time to be in. We don't really know how we're going to end up with it, but it's a really exciting time.
So yes, early days right now, the excitement on the capabilities, but still some gaps on implementation and actually useful results. Um, but looking back, right, in those days, right, it's like just as the buzz with the client server and the workstation computing, was there anything that was, particularly good as far as, your view of the future, right? Things that you got right versus things that were big misses, looking back in those days.
Yeah, you know, I was when I was at Landmark, the thing I saw was the opportunity to, you know, we were starting with individuals. In fact, back then we had a Landmark room where people would just come in and they'd have to sign up because this thing looked like a refrigerator. It was so
Yeah.
big, right? They'd
Yeah.
sign up in one person, and then you went into networking, and then you had. But I realized that there was kind of this hierarchy, and if from an information point of view, that you had a lot of archival data, and in fact, back then a lot of the archival data was in paper, and so the industry was faced with what do we do with the archival data, and there was different approaches. Some people tried to build archival databases. Some people said, I'm just going to digitize the things I need," which I think was the more practical solution.
Yes.
But that was kind of the base. If you didn't have the data in digital form that you were needing to use in your projects, you had to fix that. So that was kind of the base level, the foundation piece of the information age as it relates to geoscience and engineering in our industry. And then the next level, once you had that, then you kind of got into that next level of project data. And that's where actually Landmark, we really got a leadership position. We created this thing called OpenWorks, and it was really designed for project data. And so you would load your data in for a project, typically for an interpreter, and then they would work. Well, so then once you got there, you go to the next level, and it's really teams, right? And so now you want to start integrating across the team. And the idea was, hey, you can have a geoscientist and a reservoir engineer and a driller, and you can start building a platform that would enable those teams. And that's where we got into things like client server computing. In our case, was floating licenses. There was all kinds of things to try to enable the team. I think what we learned was that the biggest barrier turned out not to be the technology, but the people. That just trying to get a reservoir engineer to respect and work with a geoscientist and try to bring in a drilling engineer is almost impossible. But then what happened that we saw that kind of started breaking those barriers was actually visualization. That you had these team rooms where you could sit and a drilling engineer could look and see the 3D Earth model and see the drill bit go through, and then you started getting they could all see it, and the visual became the language versus trying to make a geologist a reservoir engineer or a drilling engineer. So then the next level, then you say, okay, now what about across teams? And that's where it really gets complicated, because if you look at the organization chart, now you're going across managers. And so I'm going to have a team here and a team here, but they work for two different managers, and to get those managers to agree to have them working together. And then ultimately, and I always thought it was the holy grail was, can you then cross the whole organization? It always drip along the side, across the whole organization. Can you actually start making financial decisions and integrating in the financial decisions so that people are trying to look at which field do we work, which field, and the whole thing becomes integrated. I call that the the I squared enterprise, which the idea that you had to have the data, you had to have the people working together. I What I got wrong was, number one, I thought by 2000, that was back in 1990s. I thought by 2000 that would all be working. And I think they're still trying to just get the teams to work together.
You are correct. I
Yeah.
see it every day where,
Yeah. And I still believe this, that I said, from a productivity point of view of the enterprise, it was a geometrical curve that as you went up that, if you picture on the bottom having level 1, 2, 3, and 4, as you progressed up that, productivity on this axis would be geometric. And I still believe that's true, but humans kind of get in the way, right? So that the egos and even the disciplines don't really speak that well to each other.
yes, yes, I
My,
see that every day,
yeah,
today.
no,
Um,
absolutely. My guess is that the holy grail might now be AI. That AI, the one thing it does, at least so far, is it doesn't have the same bias as a human bias. And so it could actually be the integrator uh, and serve up the information. So I think that may be the last piece of the puzzle that I completely missed. I have to admit, I was not even thinking about AI
yeah,
uh,
back
back in
then.
the 90s.
But it was great to be an optimist, right? So, but you fast forward to today, right? And with all these different AI tools coming to market, right? And as you
Yep.
mentioned, there's still a lot of hype involved, right? But there's real capabilities that are coming to the market. Um, what is the most exciting that you see, right, as far as the potential to apply that AI, whether it's as far as language models or other
Well, the
tools?
large language, yeah, there's the large language models, which is a lot bigger consumer of power, and I think there's some applications that it's almost machine learning, or it's still neural networks. But if you kind of think of machine learning neural networks, and then you kind of have the large language, and I think a lot of it will be more or less neural networks and not all the way to machine learning, because you don't need that. You don't need all of that. And what I'm seeing, I just attended a conference here in Houston. I was just curious what was going on in downstream, and it appears to me that most of it are focused on specific applications. It's more or less, can I build either machine learning or even some large language applications, but to do one thing.
So
Uh,
still in follows.
yeah, so but that doesn't really take full advantage of AI. Now, the
Yeah.
company I'm working with is a little bit different. Is that it actually looks at end-to-end processes. So we can take, for example, refinery. and or chemical plant, anything. It's a process, and it basically learns from the data. So it goes back and looks at all the historical data, and then you can kind of set what your parameters you're trying to optimize. Is it this cash flow? Is it the uh, margin, whatever it is, and then you can set that, and then the AI will actually do billions of calculations, and then it actually can start issuing directives to the operators to more efficiently run the plant. You can say, "Hey, my problem is blending, or my problem is whatever it is," and then you can kind of imagine that that starts extending into the purchasing and the trading. It can also on the other end of the shipping and optimizing that. So it's pretty interesting, and I think ultimately that's where it's going to hit. I think that you'll still have the people using optimization for individual pieces, but I also think it's going to be more efficient of looking at the whole enterprise, which goes back to the idea of the I squared enterprise. Is that now, and it's going to displace people, but it's also going to create jobs. I really do believe that because I think that you can do more, and so you might end up, becoming where I can run 20 refineries with half the number of people, but I'm twice, three times as efficient, which ultimately flows into the economy. So
Right. Right.
anyway, we're at the very early stages. I will mention this that in 1977 in Ridgefield, Connecticut, at the Schlumberger Lab in Ridgefield, Connecticut, uh, at that time our chairman, a guy named Jean Reboux, who was a Frenchman for Schlumberger, and his board members would say, "You need to look at this AI thing." And so he actually hired a guy named Minsky, who is the father of AI out of MIT.
Yes.
And then he had a couple other AI experts, and we attempted to build an AI system that would interpret dip meter logs for the ones that you might know a little bit of downhole stuff. And obviously, we just didn't have enough compute power. But at that time, I have a quote from him, but I don't have it on my proof, but he basically said, "This is an amazing technology. I have no imagination how it's going to unfold, but it is going to change the world." And that was in '77. So some people really have a long-term vision. Unfortunately, I forgot that quote when I was doing in 1990. I forgot about AI.
Right. So, as far as that decision space, right, that you imagined back then, right, it's looking like, as you just mentioned, there's the potential for this integration of data, right, to span across all operators and service providers, right,
Exactly.
in oil and gas. So
Yeah.
it'll potential to make the integration of the information decisions a lot more streamlined.
Yeah,
And
I think what'll happen in this decision space is that piece will start actually probably implementing some AI within it, I'm guessing. Yeah. It's been a long time since I've looked at that. I mean, I helped launch that, but that was a long time ago, and I'm sure that I know it's still there. I'll someday I'll have to get a demo.
Mhm.
See if
Yes,
it's
yeah.
good.
So as far as from the legacy, right? You've seen all these technology revolutions. You mentioned a couple already. So how should today's leaders balance the vision with humility to know what they might be getting right or wrong? Right? It's like sometimes there'll be big misses, right? It's like so. Um, how should the leaders look towards trying to make those decisions while still looking back and learning from the past?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and what I see is the typical technology cycle that you start out with the early technologists and you get the people that are willing to take some risks. And then you get into that next group, which are kind of watching the early technologists. Typically, in your R&D, in our industry, it's typically people in the R&D labs or in the service sectors. That they're actually creating new things, and they'll find some people then that will pick up on it and start running with it. But then you end up with this chasm,
Yeah,
pretty infamous chasm, and what happens is that where the big market is the pragmatists, and you
yeah,
really have the what is called the early majority, which they're still pragmatists. And so at that point, they want to see case studies and examples. The problem is you don't have a lot, and so you kind of get stuck. And I think what we'll see is that a lot of these companies that are in the AI will fall into the chasm and never get out, and some of them will find a customer that's willing to pioneer a bit. What I do see in the big companies, uh, particularly in our industry, where it's really a mature industry, is that particularly the big companies, have gone very conservative, and so that works in more mature technologies. But when you have a wave like this, it's going to take some leaders. You need to have some big companies that takes it on and really ramps it up to demonstrate what it can do. So it's going to be interesting to see who that's going to be. I remember in 3D, a lot of that turned out to be the larger independents. Although you had at the very beginning, the early technologists were in the oil companies. They were trying to build their own 3D workstations and
Yeah,
all that.
very much so.
Yeah, and then you had kind of like the landmarks and the GeoQuest. We were starting to find some early, kind of like not the early technologists. We were kind of fighting those guys because they were in the art lab, but we were finding some customers who were what they saw the value. They said, "Man, if I jump on this, I'm going to have a huge competitive advantage." And they
Yeah.
did. They were. I had one guy say it's like shooting fish in the barrel, and he said, "Don't tell anybody about this."
Yes.
And then we had the same issue that then you have to get the more pragmatic people uh, to pick it up. And I think right now we're more on the side of the curve of early adopt. You have the early technologists that are coming up with a lot of ideas, a lot of new products, and you have some people that are playing around with it.
Still
Everybody,
trying to build their own, right? It's like I
we,
very much remember your point about Landmark and GeoQuest, right? All the majors were trying to build their own data
oh,
management
oh,
and interpret.
exactly. And when I sat over in this conference over the last couple of days, a lot of the big guys, they're talking about all their internal projects and all the scientists building their own. And I'm just going, they're not going to get there. I mean, they just won't because the companies that are going to get you there are the ones that got 130, 140 engineers working on it. And it's not
Right.
just a part-time thing within a big company. So,
Correct. A research
yeah,
problem.
yeah, we'll go through that cycle
Yeah.
and we'll
Yeah.
see who comes out. Like I say, Netscape was a leader. And I don't know if they're out there now. I guess yeah. So who knows who will be out there if you project 10 years from now, 5 years from now. I think it's moving faster uh, than the cycles we've seen. In fact, I know it's moving faster. And so it's really interesting times.
Yes. Yes. That's a great story, Bob. That is fantastic. I relate to a lot of it being there on the operator side in those
Yeah.
early days.
Yeah.
Um, to kind of close out today's discussion, right? It's like you've seen many of your early ideas come full circle, right? So what are you most proud of in your career, right? What are you hoping to see from AI in your lifetime, right? In oil and gas. Tell us about what you see in the future.
And as it relates to AI, yeah. Well, what I do hope to see. In fact, I'm pretty sure I'll see it if I can manage to keep healthy. Is that I think it is going to go faster than any cycle we've been through, and so that's exciting to me because we're going to see applications we're not even thinking of in a way. I also believe that there's so much money flowing into this thing, which will also increase the cycle. I think that it's going to be very difficult for our industry to take full advantage of it because of their own, uh, what do I say, their own legacy. I mean, most of these companies have become very conservative.
Mhm.
And they've had to grind. I mean, they've been
Mhm.
grinding out,
Very much so.
but and so you create a whole management structure that's aimed at that. How do
The
I
culture.
maximize? How do I
Yeah.
grind costs? And so what I'm seeing is that many of them are way too conservative, right? For the rate at which it's going to move, they're sitting there, well, let's do a POV on one little project and we can't three people on that. So they're very conservative and not really, I think, saying, I'm going to go all in on this and I'm going to be a leader. Now, I have to believe that someone will do that, but
Mhm.
it's not clear to me who's going to do that.
Mhm.
And it could be a medium-sized company or
Mhm.
smaller company that overtakes them if they really, I mean, whoever fully implements this thing is going to have such a competitive advantage, and there will be winners and losers. So it's going to be pretty interesting to watch, and you could see some like some medium sized companies that grow really rapidly because of deploying AI. I haven't. It's easier to implement it in downstream because you're dealing with processes.
Mhm,
I think the upstream work, where one area you're more working in,
mhm.
is also very interesting to me. Uh, both in the geoscience area, and I've just thought about, man, just plowing through the data and really making an interpreter way more efficient. And how much of it can be AI, and how much of you still need that human intervention. And I think that the creativity of a geologist that kind of looks at the whole area, and you still have pretty sparse data sometimes. And so figuring
Yes.
out that out and then integrating it in. But then as you get more and more data, you get into production. To me, uh, it's going to be really interesting. I things like how's it going to affect the shell plays, and how's it going to affect the whole system, right? How you move sand, and if I look at an offshore platform or an offshore drilling, those are little manufacturing operations,
Yeah.
and they've got all kinds of logistics, and so it's only going to be limited by the imagination and the willpower of getting in, and I think the first ones that get in a serious way and really do it well will have a huge competitive advantage. And we'll see some companies disappear and some companies pop up. There'll be companies we've never heard of, so it's exciting.
Exciting times. So just to close it out, what um, can you point out? What do you think is one of your proudest moments in your career? One of your biggest accomplishments?
That's
Anything stands out?
a great, I
You've done
actually,
so much.
well, I live my proudest moment, or not moment, but in addition to being interested in technology, uh, I'm proud of the landmark organization we built. The other input output in ion geophysical was good, but it was really more of a turnaround of taking an existing company and when we building off of a technology wave. But we built a culture. In addition, being a relatively small company that were in every place in the world. I mean, we had offices in Russia and China and Singapore, everywhere.
Yes, you did. Yeah.
And I had a view that we were going to be the face of the nation we operated in. And so I said, no, we're not going to be exporting Americans everywhere. If we're in the UK, it's going to be people from England. If we're in Asia, and we did that. So happy moments for me was if I sat around a table from people all around the country, it looked like the UN, and really bright young people that were really on a mission. And of course, we were all excited because it's fun when you're in part of a technology wave, which we didn't create. We
Yeah.
just took advantage of it, but we helped it go along. And so that was fun. So the idea of being in a technology wave with some great technology and building an organization that really people really thrived in. Uh, we had recently a reunion of people that were in the company from the founding until the end of the decade to 2000, and we
Mhm.
had 125 people show up just for that. I mean, how many companies from 1990 can have people flying around and come to a reunion? So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being a part of that technology wave, and I'm proud of helping build a great organization.
I have to say, Bob, what you just sort of just told. I mean, that resonates with me because when I partnered with Landmark, right,
Yep.
around the world, right, there were local teams and great people in all these countries we worked with at Landmark, right, all
Yeah.
around the world. That being part of your plan and strategy, you're right. It was a great accomplishment. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
So I think that concludes our podcast today. Thank you very much, Bob.
Okay. Thank you.